Yeah, this game fucking sucks. Imagine playing Devil May Cry on the PS2 back when it first came out. You loved everything about it. The style, the combat, Dante, oh man, Dante. He was the coolest. Not only was he a badass half-human, half-demon, he just irradiated cool. After finishing the game, you were like, I can't wait to see what comes next. Surely, it will be just as good, if not better, than the first game. Devil May Cry 2 was released back in 2003 and is one of the most disappointing follow-ups to a game I've seen. For people who are unaware, Devil May Cry is the pioneer in the hack-and-slash character action, crazy, stabby-stabby subgenre of games. Basically, you're in a room of enemies and you have to kill them using all the skills you have available, and usually are done in a very stylish manner. Most games in this genre have their own mechanics to help you give an edge in battles, such as Bayonetta's Witch Time and Metal Gear Rising Zendatsu. These games are also usually very difficult to make you feel unstoppable when you hit the top rank in the arena while showing off your taunts and somewhat other unconventional tricks. Seriously, what the hell even is this? These games have a lot in common, such as good controls, charming characters, really stupid shit, and most importantly, an expressive combat system that has lots of room for improvisation and expression. Devil May Cry 2 says fuck you and has none of that. If anyone thinks it's unreasonable that I would be using comparisons from other games from other console generations to help make my point, I would just like to say that I think the console generation it came from is irrelevant. There are plenty of games that came out from 14 years ago that are much better than games that came out today's age, some of which are part of the same franchise. Even so, I'll mostly be sticking to the original Devil May Cry when it comes to my comparisons, since the two games came out only after a minor gap between the two. So, without any more stalling,
let's rock.
The game opens in a museum. A narrator is recapping the story of Dante's father, Sparta. This redhead woman is attacked by demons, and they almost manage to steal the artifact from the display case. Dante arrives on the scene and quickly dispatches of the demons and recovers the item that was almost stolen. The woman, whose name is Lucia, tells Dante to meet her on Dumeri Island. When Dante reaches his destination, he's contracted to stop a man named Arius from summoning the demon Argosax and obtaining ultimate power. In exchange for stopping Arius' plan, Dante will learn more about his father Sparta. That's about all you need to know, since that's all that the game's really about. Sure, the game has cutscenes, but nothing really happens in them. Hell, Dante doesn't even have any banter with the different bosses as he did in the first game, which is really disappointing.
A big surprise. I hope for your sake you got something inside that big body of yours.
Sure, the first Devil May Cry was simple in its plot too, but it made up for that with the character of Dante at least being entertaining to be around. And if you ask me, the cutscenes were a lot more exciting to watch since stuff was actually going on in them. Also, the first game at least tried to have a grand scale, considering you were killing the ruler of the underworld as well as getting revenge for your family. I'm not gonna pretend that the original DMC was amazing at storytelling, but hell, at least it tried. Devil May Cry 2 is so much weaker comparison. Even Dante looks like he doesn't give a shit. Dante looks so bored throughout the entire game. He seems to lose the charm that he had in the previous game as well. All he does in Devil May Cry 2 is toss a coin, which I guess is cool? No. Not really. People rag on DMC Devil May Cry, actual title, for making Dante a smoking alcoholic that lives in a trailer and wore a brown jacket, but at least this Dante still had character. Even if you disagree with the direction Capcom Ninja Theory went with the characters, they at least attempted a story with scale. Whether or not you believe they did a good job is up to interpretation, but hell, at least I know this guy liked it. DMC 2 Dante is boring. The only thing he has to him is that weird coin toss thing that he does. He lacks the cheesiness and charm that he had in the first game. Dante was cool and mysterious before. He wasn't afraid of what he was up against, so he cracked jokes at the enemies. Hell, even the small shit like Dante grabbing a new weapon is boring in DMC 2. What's more interesting, this? Or this? I know that no one came here for a class in character writing and staying consistent with the tone that was previously set up, so let's change into action game analysis mode. And just for clarification, I'm not the most knowledgeable person when it comes to analyzing shit like frame data and specific pieces of tech, but I do know at least a little bit of what I'm talking about. So my criticisms for the game will be based on my own preferences and what I think worked well in other games and how I think that this game failed as a product of its own. I have 5 pieces of criteria for action games to consider them well made. Those being the expressiveness of the combat system, how versatile the attacks could be, the variety of encounters, level design, and the skill that is required to not only finish the game, but to master the mechanics. Remember, these are just my standards, and they aren't objective by any means. Devil May Cry 2 has a very odd combat system, especially when compared to the first game. Dante in DMC2 somehow feels not only stiff, but floaty at the same time. Let me explain. Devil May Cry 2 has a different approach to the combo system than the first game. In the first Devil May Cry, you had to press the attack button at different intervals to change the way the attack would come out. You press it fast for the 3-hit combo, or wait before pressing the attack button again to switch the sword attack. The attacks came out fast and were satisfying to use, as well as having many opportunities to chain them into other attacks by throwing out some moves early to get to the later ones. For example, if you do a combo and end with launching the enemy up in the air, you could intentionally miss the first 2 attacks so that by the time the enemy is about to land on the floor, you could follow up with the attack that you're planning on using to continue the combo. Or, if you feel like you can do it in time, you could even switch weapons mid-combo and use a completely different set of moves than what you're planning on using before. Devil May Cry 2, on the other hand, only has 4 combos that you can do on the ground, and can only be done by tilting the analog stick in different directions mid-combo while you aren't holding on the lock-on button. These moves are not only really slow, but they are also very unsatisfying to use. The attacks lack the crunch that the sword had in the first game. It's more like slapping someone with a foam toy. Most moves can't even combo into each other anymore, since the knockback is too much. If you try launching an enemy up in the air, you only really have 2 options. You can follow them up by shooting them, or you can do a really stiff and inaccurate air combo. Air juggles are a very important part of a lot of action games. Bayonetta thrives off of it because of the number of aerial options you have available. Not only do you have the ability to continue your combo in the air, but you can also chase the enemy back down to the floor to continue the combo there. And before I get the
Bayonetta is a completely different game, you shouldn't compare it to Devil May Cry,
you can do that in Devil May Cry as well. The point I'm trying to make is that the move list in Devil May Cry 2 is lacking so much to have any real experimentation. The enemies die far too quickly to even try to do anything fancy, which is something Devil May Cry 1 did a lot better. Devil May Cry 2 also strangely lacks a taunt feature that was in the first game, as well as many action games since. The taunt was a very important mechanic in the first Devil May Cry game, since it was not only to add a bit of style to the game by performing a taunt after a long string of attacks, but it also had gameplay purposes. Taunting in DMC1 would restore some of your devil trigger gauge, as well as keep your style rank up so you can continue the combo without having it reset. This can lead to having a much higher rank at the end of the mission, which can net you more rewards. Come to think of it, DMC2 really lacks in the upgrade departments as well. In almost every action game, you can spend the currency that you earned by defeating enemies on an in-game shop to acquire new attacks to use in battle, as well as upgrading the effectiveness of your gear. The original DMC had some moves that you were able to purchase once you acquired the Alistair weapon. Upgrades such as Stinger, move where Dante thrusts himself forward and stabs the enemy, Round Trip, where Dante throws his sword at an enemy and is able to attack with his fists at the same time. You can even upgrade your Devil Trigger to give you some extra attacks that can also help with performing combos on enemies. DMC2 only lets you upgrade the damage output of the weapons, which is so lame. What you start with is what you're keeping for the rest of the game. That means this pathetic excuse for a Stinger attack cannot be upgraded and is now practically useless. What's even worse is that there are no new moves that you can unlock through the red orbs. Collecting them is only good for buying items, which will only make the game easier than it already is. DMC2 almost puts me to sleep with how unchallenging it is. That's not me trying to flex or anything, the game is practically broken with how unbalanced it is. You do far too much damage for how much health the enemies have. They die in only a few hits, so trying to do anything fancy is out of the question. You'll most likely end up spamming the same combo through the entire game, which is a horrible time. The combat is nowhere near as exciting as the original DMC, or any other action game for that matter. It feels too floaty and slow to be considered anything but mindless, so yes, I am literally saying that this game is the Smash Bros. Brawl a Devil May Cry. I still haven't even mentioned the most broken part about this game. Ebony and Ivory completely destroy any challenge this game could have possibly had. Some action games tend to have ranged weapons that you can use at a moment's notice to help keep your combo going, and to do a little bit of chip damage. DMC1 has it, Bayonetta has it, the Xbox Ninja Gaiden games have it. Devil May Cry 2 will also have the guns that you can use to help stun enemies, but it completely breaks the game. The guns do far too much damage, shoot too fast, cause actual hit stun so the enemies get locked in, and you can do shit like this. And for some ungodly reason, you can upgrade the guns as well as use them in Devil Trigger to make them even more effective. Seriously, who thought this was okay? Enemies in action games usually come in two different forms. Either they're really hard to kill and there isn't a lot of them on screen, or they follow the strength in number rule by being sort of easy to kill, but there's a lot more to manage. Most games usually do the latter method for most encounters, as it's a great way to have the player use the mechanics to their fullest. Once in a while, the game will try to break up the pace with a mini-boss or a really strong enemy that you'll have to have a one-on-one encounter with. Devil May Cry 2 does show signs of following this rule, but due to the overall game balance, it doesn't really matter. The most common type of enemy are these weird cage demon things that don't put up much of a fight at all, and the birds. There are no demons that you fight that have any real unique skill or ability that you have to master in order to defeat them, since they all just sort of charge at you and hope for the best. Level design in action games is a bit tricky to criticize since people have their own preferences. There are people who would rather have the level be nothing but hallways and battles just so they don't have to bother with any of the filler and constantly stay in the action. I prefer a bit more to do rather than just fight hordes of enemies. It adds to the variety, it makes it so the player doesn't get bored. The original DMC had puzzle solving by grabbing items and bringing them to the correct rooms in order to open up pathways. DMC 2 doesn't really have anything like that other than smacking some switches to open up the path. This is fine, but the problem is how big and empty the levels are. There's a lot of running around in open environments that lead to nothing. Sometimes you may find a blue orb shard, or hell, even a full blue orb, but this is few and far between. Large environments may also affect combat. Since there is so much open space, most of the moves can no longer be effective. The wall run and the wall jump are useless, since there isn't really anywhere to use them. You'll naturally gravitate to using ebony and ivory since there are fewer options for flying enemies, and because you notice how effective they end up being, you just sort of continue using them until the end of the game. Every encounter can be easily finished just by backing up and spamming ebony and ivory till the cows come home. This even works for the boss battles. This includes the final boss, where all you can do is just stand around and blast away with ebony and ivory until it dies. This is just pathetic. The game is too easy to really lose at all unless you're being very careless or if you're intentionally trying to die. There isn't really any advanced tech that you can learn to try to master the combat system other than exploiting the game to spam the air combo as seen in the footage here. I think it goes without saying that Devil May Cry 2 isn't a good game. It doesn't even pass a single requirement that I listed. Talk about a major downgrade from the pioneer of character action games. At least they managed to get their shit together for Devil May Cry 3, and hell, even though the reboot has some odd choices, at least it's fun to play. Since the series is officially returning in March, now is the best time to check it out if you haven't already. I just suggest staying away from DMC 2. Or not, I really don't give a shit.